Hello and welcome to another Tippling Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video where I give you the extra juicy nuggets concerning the war in Ukraine so you can get a better understanding and contextual appreciation of the conflict. Where should we start? Well, I'm going to start with correcting myself, or at least qualifying myself a little bit based on a comment that a viewer put in one of the videos. I do read your comments, honestly. So this is when I was talking on a previous video about just a couple of days ago about the Financial Times graph where they produced data on 41 different donors to the Ukraine, both in military, humanitarian, and financial matters. And you can see that I was talking about how the US far outstripped anyone else, and then you had the EU institutions, and then the UK and Germany and Canada and Poland and France. And I was a little bit, I suppose, critical of France, saying, "Look, France is down here." And that they've not done as much. Look at, oh, isn't Britain wonderful type thing, And I was saying actually Canada has done really well, Poland's done really well, and someone rightfully said this. I would like to point out to you that EU institutions are financed by the countries it includes. Absolutely right, of course. And for example, France is the second contributor with 25%. So to be fair, you should add 25% of the EU aid onto the French aid, which makes it a much higher contributor than the UK. We see that this mistake most oftenly on Anglophone media. Some countries like France or Ireland, also usually the most favourable to building, just to take one example, a European defence, but goes also for buying vaccines, said right at the beginning that aid would go through EU institutions and not individual countries. It would be fair for you to correct this misrepresentation in your comments because it gives a negative view on the very countries who are the most favourable to help together in a more efficient way. This is an absolutely bloody brilliant comment. And it's brilliant because it's absolutely right. It's calling me out on something which is evidently wrong that I said. I was wrong, or at least not fully correct, not fully honest with the way I was appraising things. And I said this is a really good point. I need to mention this, which I'm doing now. As you can see, I think you should, he said, or she, who knows. You can also tackle the problem under another angle. Germany, Poland, etc., are also European institutions, so you could also add to all the individual contributions to the EU institutions' contribution. This makes it practically on par with the US and probably a higher ratio to the GDP. Anyway, the point is not really who gives what and all the publicity that goes with it, but which effect or what effect it really has in the field. In that respect, European countries typically under-publicize their aid, even if their military aid is insufficient. Now, here again, France is a good example. The French have a tradition of calling their army "la grande muette," the big mute, and simply does not give any figures or names. None. This is war. This must be won. Thanks for your great post, AI. Really fabulous comments there. So let's then go back to this and say, right, okay, if you added Germany, Poland, France, Norway were might be a slightly funky one there actually because they've got a separate agreement with the EU, Netherlands, and then added all of them onto the EU as was suggested, then this would actually be greater than the United States. EU has together about a population of 500 million or so, so larger than the US. But then it's all about GDP, so it could be that the percentage of GDP that the EU gives is actually higher than the percentage of the GDP that the United States gives. And the point of that is not to say, oh, look, we're better, but it's just to say, actually, we've undersold what the EU have done. We've underpublicized it, and they often get not as much kudos as they deserve because there are two sets of figures going on. You've got the individual figures that are kind of unilateral decisions by individual governments, and you've got the collective decisions made by the EU that has greater bargaining power and more efficiency to produce or to give stuff on this larger scale. So it can work both ways. Not only is the EU institutions actually much larger, but then if you break that down to their constituent parts, these countries like Germany and like France would. So if France is a 25% contributor to this, right? So France has contributed probably that much. You add that onto France, right? And that would take it past the UK. It's absolutely correct. So this is fascinating, and there are lots of people like Ukraine, the latest podcast, who I follow, religiously, the Telegraph, that are always really harsh on France and Germany. But actually, when you look at the statistics, they are looking probably at these statistics in isolation and forgetting the EU statistics as a whole. And they say, "Oh, UK are much better than Germany and France. So look at how rubbish France are." The reality is, France and Germany are probably both greater contributors than the UK when you take into what they contribute through their EU funding. So this is such a good criticism of what I said, and it's bang on. And I should have been better than that, and that's great. Anyway, just I had to clear that up. I can't live with uh, wrong claims and whatnot. So going on to something completely different, a Russian Su-25 jet suffered damage or a malfunction and was forced to land without landing gear. The full extent of damage is unclear, but unlikely to be flying again very soon. True, but this is well worth a watch. I mean, it's just pretty incredible. And actually, this pilot does an absolutely magnificent job here. See how well this pilot lands this plane, and how smoothly he brings it down to the runway. It's just really, really good. I mean, it must be pretty hairy to be a pilot doing this. Obviously, it really helps that there's no wind by the looks of it. Well, not much. Look at that, so carefully put down. Absolutely brilliant. Just that's a really amazing bit of footage. So, irrespective of whether it's Russia or Ukraine, I think that's fascinating stuff. This is from the Dead District, but this has been seen all over the shop recently. So this is actually previously unseen footage that's very old. It came out the second day of the war, and it's a Kamarova OBR, a Spetsnaz unit, so a top quality sort of special forces type unit in Irpin by Kiev, and it's a column of vehicles that looks in a pretty poor state of affairs. And yeah, there you go. I mean, the number of hit vehicles there. It'd be interesting to see what they were hit by, what happened. I can't remember back to then. So much has happened since then, but quite incredible footage. And then going back some as well, there's other vehicles burning. If you see that, actually, individual columns of smoke there, you've got quite a number of vehicles. Oh, and another explosion. Maybe some cooking off of ammo. Just pretty devastating stuff. And there you go. And that's footage that hadn't previously been seen. Interesting stuff. So as we go on now, what I want to speak about, and there's so much to talk about in this, I'm actually going to pick a couple of excerpts that I heard actually on Ukraine the latest podcast, just because this report by RUSI. So RUSI is the Royal United Services Institute, sorry, which is a UK sort of military think tank. Got a lot of really interesting members who are often commenting, people like Justin Bronk that I've referred to recently and previously, Jack Watling. But this is a report that they did, and they're going to bring out another report from July onwards. But this is a report that analyzes the war from February to July 2022, and you can download it for free from their RUSI.org website. So it's a fairly sizable piece of reporting. I'm taking my first quote from page 30 to 31, and this is interesting. Remember, this is really discussing the early parts of the war. On the second day of the conflict, there was a considerable anxiety in the Ukrainian armed forces as to the ability to halt the advance from Gomel. In understanding why the Russians stalled, Despite having the means and forces to push through the small Ukrainian units in front of them, it is necessary to consider the psychological state of the Russian troops. The troops were largely moving in administrative formations. They lacked a clear understanding of where they were. Whole towns did not exist when the maps they were using were made. So I've talked about this before, that they had old maps, and this is one of the problems that they faced. So they ended up literally driving through towns that they thought would be like a country road or a main road or whatever, and they're suddenly in a town and they're getting hit from in this town and thinking, what are we doing in this town? It's not even on a map. No wonder we're getting hit, and this is a bad place to be, and we wouldn't have otherwise driven through here, type thing. They're not anticipating heavy fighting, nor did they have established communications to report the situation or to receive updated instructions. Ukrainian forces found themselves bypassed and often confronted with columns of unprepared Russian troops. Even without higher instructions, the immediate task was clear to these units, and at the tactical level, Ukrainian forces therefore retained the tactical initiative. For the 1st Tank Brigade, for example, the first days of fighting saw numerous meeting engagements in forests at around 100 to 200 meter range, where restricted movement limited the Russian ability to bring their mass to bear against a specific tactical situation. Better crew training combined with short-ranged engagements, where their armament was competitive, and the faster autoloader on a T-64 allowed Ukrainian tank crews to achieve significant damage against surprised Russian units. Another example of the problem was that Russian units would arrive in towns and begin to try to engage with the civilian population to understand where they were. Their position would be reported, and the Russian unit would be engaged with artillery. This contrast between expectations and reality induced panic and caused the abandonment of equipment that was widely observed on social media. Fascinating little insight there, and there's more. I'll read you a few more excerpts. Now, what's pointed out by this report is that actually the Russians could quite easily have won the confrontation or the war early days if a few things had gone the right way. I mean, part of the problem, like if the plan had been executed sort of properly and a little bit this, a little bit that, then actually they had thought about doing things in a really speedy way, and they recognized what needed to be taken out, etc., etc. But you had these huge problems, and one of the big problems was that no one down the chain knew about this, right? So you had this situation whereby, and I don't know if you remember this, but loads of people who were caught, surrendered, or whatever, in the first kind of week or two, these soldiers were saying, we didn't know, we thought we were on a training exercise, or we didn't know, we literally don't know where we're supposed to be, we don't know what we're doing here, blah blah blah. And it turns out that the plan was concocted by the very top echelons of the hierarchy and wasn't passed down at all, so that no one knew that this was going to happen literally days before it happened. Like no one else other than those top people knew. And then when they did find out, they didn't have time to prepare, they didn't have time to tell their troops, and so therefore that sort of fed into the poor execution, because no one really knows what they're supposed to be doing. It's all suddenly put upon them. There's no kind of preparation. There's no kind of understanding. So this is another quote. At D+3, which is the 3rd day, it was apparent that the Russian commanders that their plan had gone seriously wrong. It was evident that Ukraine's air defenses were still operational, that the Russian ground forces had stalled, and that there was fierce resistance. Moreover, it was apparent that the activities of the special services in Kyiv, aimed at neutralizing Ukraine's political leadership critical to Russia's theory of victory, were failing, as the security service of Ukraine identified, isolated, and destroyed their infiltrated groups. In fact, as Ukraine mobilized, repositioned its forces, and as its air defenses recovered from their initial displacement and surprise, the defense was hardening. There was, therefore, a need to transition from attempting the coup de main to deliberate combat operations to defeat the UAF. This transition in the Russian posture began on D+3, with a progressive improvement in the enemy's cohesion over the following month. However, it took considerable time for Russian commanders to understand what was happening, to assert control over their units, or to adapt their tactics. So, yeah, there you go. And I'm actually going to rewind a little bit and read you, because that kind of feeds into, that's a bit of detail to the sort of stuff that you can read about in this, to feed you back into a couple of paragraphs from the executive summary, actually. So this is page 3. So Russia planned to invade Ukraine over a 10-day period and therefore occupy the country to enable annexation by August 2022. The Russian plans presupposed that speed and the use of deception to keep Ukrainian forces away from Kyiv could enable the rapid seizure of the capital. And actually, technically they weren't wrong. If it had gone to plan and they'd done things, better. The Russian deception plan largely succeeded, and the Russians achieved a 12-to-1 force ratio advantage north of Kyiv. The very operational security that enabled the successful deception, however, also led Russian forces to be unprepared at the tactical level. That's what I was talking about before, to execute the plan effectively. So on the one hand, they kept everything so secret that there was great deception available, and in fact, the Ukrainians didn't believe there was going to be attack. The UK and US intelligence services were about the only two in the world that thought something was going to happen. And they kept telling the Ukrainians, and then I think France and Germany were saying no, 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 and Europe mainly saying no. And then it did happen, and this is largely because Russia had done a really good job of keeping this secret. But however, in keeping this so secret, none of the army knew what the hell they were doing, and so that's the problem. So to continue, the Russian plan's greatest deficiency was a lack of reversionary courses of action. As a result, when speed failed to produce the desired results, Russian forces found their position steadily degraded as Ukraine mobilized. Despite these setbacks, Russia refocused on Donbass, and since Ukraine had largely expended its ammunition supply, proved successful in subsequent operations, slowed by the determination rather than the capabilities of Ukrainian troops. From April, the West became Ukraine's strategic depth, and the Ukrainian armed forces only robbed Russia of the initiative once long-range fires brought Russian logistics under threat. The tactical competence of the Russian military proved significantly inferior compared with the expectations of many observers based within and outside Ukraine and Russia. Nevertheless, Russian weapons systems proved largely effective, and those units with a higher level of experience demonstrated that the AFRF, so the Russian armed forces, have considerable military potential, even if deficiencies in training in the context of how they were employed meant that the Russian military failed to meet that potential. Factoring in the idiosyncrasies of the Russian campaign, there are 5 key areas that should be monitored to judge whether the Russian military is making progress in resolving its structural and cultural deficiencies. And these areas should be used to inform assessments of Russian combat power in the future. And it goes on to talk about those 5 things there, and then it goes on to talk about the ramifications for British and NATO militaries and what we can kind of learn from that. All really, really interesting stuff. And Russky did a report that I also discussed concerning the air scenario, the air campaign, and Russia's inability to do siege, suppression of enemy air defenses activities to get air superiority and then air supremacy. They just completely failed, and that was kind of the key to them screwing up further and further afield. But they almost did. They did quite well initially in the first couple of days, and then it just didn't continue all the way through. And the same here is, they just completely failed after there could have been initial promise right at the beginning. Yeah, fascinating stuff. It's now, of course, we're in a very different situation where NATO and the West and other allies are really aiding Ukraine to a point where Russia's capabilities and capacity are being degraded to the point of them not being able to win in any particular scenario. It looks like Russia, my opinion would be that Russia has had it. All that they can do now is just bring more mobilized troops to bear in the conflict. If they can't, okay, they might be able to get some stuff from Iran, but if they can't get stuff mass from anywhere else, including from their own kind of stocks or manufacturing industries, then, because that's what Ukraine can do in terms of getting new stuff and better stuff, then there's an asymmetry that will continue, and it would just manifest itself in a complete degradation of Russia's capabilities and capacities, and you just can't. That you're absent a game changer. Russia don't have a game changer. The only thing you can think of would be, chemical weapons and nuclear. And the scary thing is, the worse that Russia do, or the better that Ukraine do, and I talked about this previously, the kind of the Putin paradox. The worse that, sorry, the better that Ukraine do, the more crazed Putin might become, such that he does things that are way, way worse, like those two options. So there you go. That is a little hint of the RUSI report. I assume it'll be well worth reading in its entirety for all of you if you have some time on your hands. So I just want you to have a little look at something Thierry Schmidlin has said. So this was in response to me saying we need to, or Ukraine need to continue to take out the Kerch Bridge, because without that, Russia are in trouble for supplying the whole of the Zaporizhia and Kherson area here. So if you take out the Kerch Bridge, and then you continue to take out the logistics around here, so you cut the logistics, I don't know, like that. So there's no rail and truck or road routes through to this whole area. Then you are really disabling this area from being supplied, because of course the Kerch is massively important for both rail and road through and into all of this area here. Okay, so that's been taken out, which means everything has to come through here. You take that out with an attack down here, and you can do it with HIMARS. You can take out, as they are, they're taking out rail and road hubs there, or certainly rail hubs. What Thierry said is, actually there's another bridge you can take out which isn't too distant. It's hitting in Russia, and this might be controversial because it's not hitting a military target per se, but he talks about this bridge here being a really important and potentially easy target, as that is vital for logistics coming in through from Russia into into the occupied territories. And that's because there aren't any rail connections from Russia through to Ukraine, sorry, claims. So currently no railway is operational from Russia to Ukraine. Most logistics goes through the E58 road, and then join a railway station takes it on railway to the north and to the west. But if that bridge is out, with the Kerch Bridge still partially open, that would be a great success and very problematic to Russians, also near the front line. So that interesting point, yeah, nice bit of sort of speculation and some strategic approach to what should be bombed next. Okay, and one of the final things I'm going to show you today is just a little tank duel. I say it's a tank duel. This says a tank duel between the Ukrainian T-64BV against the T-72B3. So Russian really has got a bit of a better tank, I think, judging by those. Well, the T-72 should be better than T-64. It just depends on the modifications. Ukrainian tankers knocked the Russian tank out the first shot. I don't know how much you can call this a duel. I don't know what's happened before, but we have this Ukrainian tank comes in here and takes it out with the first shot. So he's popping along up this road, and there's a tank up there, which is interesting. I mean, the distance that they can get with the accuracy, just, I'm in awe of how these things work so well. But then I don't know how much computer assistance there is for a gunner, especially in a T-64. But who knows? It takes a shot, bosh, bang, and it's taken out. That's the end of that tank. And then actually that T-64 continues up the road, and then has a pop at something else here, which is much closer, and bosh, bang. So good shooting from the Ukrainian tankers there. Excellent. If you're Ukrainian, not so good. If you're those Russian, if you're that Russian tank. Anyway, there you go. Hopefully that was of some interest to you. Please like, subscribe, and share. And there are lots of ways to support this channel. All the details are down below. You can pop along to uasupporters.com/ATP and grab anything there that shows your support for Ukraine, and it will also a little bit of commission will come my way, so you can get yourself some flags if you want, as an example. Anyway, Toodle Pips, catch you later. I will be producing a video on the Brittany Griner exchange. That's absolutely certain to get half of your goats going there and really trigger some angry retorts to me and saying you're never going to watch my channel again because, bah, you know, so be it. It'd be nice to see if you can interact with the content. You know, if you disagree, what's a good reason you disagree, and bring your receipts, that kind of thing. So, anyway, look out for that. I'm sure it annoys some people, but hey, you know, I'm good for it. True, Pips.